Who are these people?
Let's get to our next story. So,
Which you mentioned made you cry.
yes, it did. It did make me cry. Real men do that.
You should make this a series, to be honest with you.
What, the stories that make Reef cry series? Yeah, I mean, I think the stories from Gaza. Sure. I mean, luckily, this is from the Electric Intifada, which they actually showcase Palestinian writers. But, you know, I find it important to actually bring the voices of the people that we care about. So, and I felt like since our stories last week about food in Gaza, go check that out if you've not already. I felt like these were in the similar, like, context. But this is from Mahamadi from the Intifada, and Hope in the Shape of a Tomato is the name of the title. Again, links to our articles are always down in the description. But they write, I live with my sister Haneen in a small tent on the outskirts of Al Zawaida near Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip. Before the ceasefire, trying to survive the constant Israeli attacks consumed all our time. Hunger made those days pass with slow, unbearable pain. Haneen, 26, is a mother to 2 children, Riyadh 5 and Imad 3. She carries the weight of the world on her shoulders while trying to hide her pain behind a smile that fools no one. Every morning I wake up to the sound of Riyadh trying to craft a new toy from sticks and stones. I'll make a tomato tree, and we'll eat from it every day, he says with a voice full of hope. Imad sits behind him, clapping enthusiastically as if cheering his brother on to turn the dream into reality. One day in November, we all sat inside our tent trying to share what little food we had left, a small piece of bread and a bit of olive oil. Imad, too young to grasp the meaning of hunger, stared at the tiny plate in front of him and then at his mother as if asking why there wasn't more. Riyadh, with his innocent curiosity, looked at me and asked, why can't we eat until we're full? I had no answer. Suddenly, Haneen stood up and left the tent. I knew she was going to look for something, anything, to feed her children. After a while, she returned, holding a small, withered tomato in her hand. She looked at us with a forced smile and said, I found this in the nearby field. We'll add it to our dinner. She sat on the ground, placed the tomato on a piece of stale bread, and began cutting it with extreme care. She treated the tomato as if it were the most precious thing she had. The children gathered around her, their eyes shining with excitement. She divided the tomato slices among us. Riyadh took a small piece and looked at it cautiously before asking, Mama, if I eat it slowly, will it grow bigger? Haneen laughed softly and replied, Yes, Riyadh, if you eat it with love, it will feel like it's growing. Imad ate his slice of the tomato carefully, as if were afraid it would vanish too quickly. I noticed the exhaustion in my sister's eyes and the worry for her children's future. I realized hunger wasn't the only weight on her shoulders. After we finished eating, Riyadh went outside the tent and started collecting stones and sticks to craft his tomato tree. Imad sat beside him, helping arrange the tomato fruits made of small rocks. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, I sat with Haneen outside the tent. The moon illuminated the empty field in front of us. I asked her how she found the strength to keep going. She answered quietly, I have no choice. Riyadh and Imad think the tomato I brought today was a miracle, and I want to believe that too. They don't understand that tomorrow night might bring nothing. I had no words to offer her. I just sat beside her, watching the field and wondering if more miracles awaited us. In the days that followed, Riyadh and Imad began treating the field outside the tent as if it were a magical farm. They buried seeds that found unsuitable for eating, saying, when the tomato tree grows, the food will return, and so will Baba. Their father, Mahmoud Samour, is a teacher at Al-Aqsa University. The Israeli military detained him in November when the family tried to move to the south for safety. He remains a captive in Israeli detention. I watched Haneen, realizing how her children's simple dream had turned into something resembling faith for her. Every day she went out with the boys, watering the ground with the little water we had and whispering a quiet prayer no one else could hear. Maybe the earth will bloom one day. Maybe. But I knew that Haneen wasn't just watering the earth. She was nurturing hope in her children's hearts, a hope that tomorrow might be less cruel and that life, despite everything, could be reborn from a single tomato. Thoughts, Care Bear? Oof.
This is why I teach young kids.
Yeah.
They are not jaded yet. Everything, and it just reminds me, yeah, it's obviously it sucks if young children especially go through tragedy and pain. But I don't think we give young children credit for how resilient they can be and how innocent they can be in terms of they're not entirely jaded to the world yet, which is why it pains me when children unnecessarily go through that kind of pain to the point where they're so, I'm not sure the word, but so, jaded early that it kills me. But it's still the idea of, for them, there's everything is possible. And that's the type of thinking that I want to ultimately instill in my kids. Because literally for them, they can be anything. They can do anything. Yeah. And my job is to help curate that possibility for them. My job is not to crush their dreams. If anything, my job is to cultivate that.
Yeah.
So if they believe that a tomato will grow from that ground, despite, and we know the reality, that earth is so polluted that nothing will probably grow. If not, it's not going to be good. But I'm not going to tell those kids that.
I wanted to add to this.
Belief,
they were talking about their water supply and that they were actually watering this like fake garden. Like, I think that that's even more when you realize that their water is like they're not getting any
polluted.
Well, not just yes,
or not
right, or like none at all. But this is in the West Bank, so it's slightly different, but very similar. But I think it gives some context to that.
I can't hear it.
Oh, how about I fix that? How about I do that? And action.
I can't wash my hair because of the Israeli occupation. All of our tanks are out of water. We only get water every 15 to 20 days. Hence the tanks. And if you're out of luck until the next refill. These water tanks are a staple on Palestinian houses in the West Bank to combat the chronic water shortage. But the problem isn't that there's not enough water. The problem is even our water sources are under occupation, and it's all controlled by the Israeli government and private Israeli corporations, who allot Palestinians less water than the World Health Organization recommends. But why? What are they doing with all our water? Funneling it into neighboring illegal settlements, where Israelis have a continuous supply of water and consume more than double their Palestinian neighbors. And to top it off, the Israeli company that supplies Palestinians in Bethlehem and Hebron with 70% of our water is reducing that amount even more. I can't wash my hair because of the Israeli occupation. All of our tanks
Pause.
are out of...
Pause. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think that's makes it even more like that they're using that water to like have this garden for the children. I find like heartbreaking to say the least, but also inspiring at the same time, So, but in the same vein, this story, again, from the Electronic Intifada, this time from Rajaa, Altana, both of these writers in Gaza, so appreciate the work they are doing. But they write, In a small tent on the outskirts of Al Mawasi in Khan Yunis, my sister Yara lives with her 2 children, Yasmin and Muhammad. Before Israel's genocidal assault, my sister and her family lived with me and mine in a modest home in Gaza City. Yara cared for her 2 children, while her husband, Ibrahim, worked in the market selling water for her 2 children. Selling water to earn money for the family. I worked as a teacher at a nearby school. Our lives were simple, but filled with love and peace. We were displaced at the beginning of the Israeli attacks in October when our home became unsafe under Israelis' relentless, indiscriminate bombing. We fled on foot, carrying only what we could. After a long journey fraught with...
Pause right there.
Yes.
So, notice how you said displaced at the beginning.
Yes.
Because I'm seeing a lot of folks online and people that I know who are like, with Trump's recent thing of displacing them, though, people are like, oh, well, look at how you voted. Like, look what Biden, look at what Trump is doing now. Bitches, this has been happening since
for
October.
A minute. Yeah.
And that was happening under Biden.
And then happening way before then, on top of that.
So, right. So it's just another example of just like Trump bad, Trump boogeyman, that they want to focus on that, when the reality is they've been displaced, since really the turn of the since 1948, but more especially like within the last decade, and more particularly within the last year, where people in northern Gaza had to go to the south in Rafah. Like, that was in the news not so long ago, and a lot of these folks have already forgotten that.
Well, and think about, in our last story, they fled to south like they were told to do.
Right.
The father was still detained because he worked at Alaska. Right? Like, So, like, it is more than one way to be dangerous to travel in that area. So,
right.
Anyway, after a long journey fraught with danger, hunger, and fear, we found refuge in a small tent on the outskirts of Khan Yunis. Muhammad, my 4-year-old nephew, has autism. He seemed to live in a world entirely his own. For him, life revolved around one thing: a red apple. Muhammad didn't fully understand the chaos around him, nor did he care. Apples were his sanctuary. He loved the texture, the color, scent, and the way they spun between his small fingers. They weren't just apples to him. They were his safe haven in a world full of fear and disorder. But apples became rare during genocide. The last apple my sister had managed to get in weeks, she gave to Muhammad. He refused to eat it, insisting instead on keeping it close. The apple became dried out, cracked, and lost its vibrant red color, but to Muhammad, it remained his most precious treasure. Muhammad, can you give Mama the apple? Yara asked him one evening as he clutched it tightly. He shook his head firmly, silently telling her, don't take my world away. Yara didn't push further. That particular night, a cold December evening, with the sounds of bombs tearing through the sky, something remarkable happened. Muhammad, without a word, approached Yasmin. He broke his dried-out apple in half and handed her a piece. Looked at her with innocent yet profound love. He said in his small, stumbling voice, Yasmin, you eat. A child who couldn't understand the horrors of war understood hunger. A boy who lived in a closed world opened his heart to share the only thing that gave him comfort. The next morning, my sister woke to the sound of her children playing outside the tent. Muhammad was sitting on the ground, holding what was left of the apple's peel. He was drawing lines in the sand with it. His drawings didn't make sense. It was as if he was creating a new world from the ashes of ours. Life in that tent wasn't easy, and hunger was an unrelenting enemy, yet Muhammad's apple became a symbol for the family, one of hope, love, and resilience, even in the darkest times. That's it. That's the stories. A little bit more. Muhammad's father, Ibrahim, Yara's husband, was separated from us during the chaos He now spends most of his day in the market selling water and trying to secure food and aid for the family. His absence from the tent is difficult, but he does everything he can to support us. My sister Yara now says, Muhammad taught me that the smallest things can carry the greatest meanings. So, thoughts, Care Bear?
Fun sped.
Yeah, but it does say
When I
perhaps,
say
and this
sped,
is
special education.
yeah, it does say that, and this is why I wanted to bring it. Was perhaps no one will remember this story after the war ends, but I will never forget it. Muhammad, the boy who lived in his own world, taught me that love can be bigger than hunger, and that even a dried out apple can be the greatest gift in the world. And I think remembering these stories is super important. Like, I don't want them to just be lost in the ether, so might as well put them in stone here on our channel, you know? But
well, that's why I'm saying you should make this a series. So that way you can create a playlist for them. So that way, if not to say people will forget, but at least you have something on record to show that you actually took the time to care about. Look, it's one thing to talk about news or whatever, but it's another thing to hear from actual people. Now, granted, we have tried to have Palestinians on the show. And obviously, because reasons of safety or whatever else, that's been extremely difficult. But this is probably the next best thing that we can do. So, but it's important because it humanizes them. And especially for you guys in our chat, our family, like when you hear a lot of these pro-Israeli shows say, Hamas and all this kind of stuff, you can show them this. It's like, this is the reality of what's happening. And this is happening because this is not Hamas's responsibility. They're not the occupying force here.
No.
This is happening because of Israel. They're the ones in control. And now Trump is basically saying he wants to take over Gaza, which now people are touching their pearls about.
Right.
But Biden has facilitated the means of which Trump is now able to expedite the destruction and the rebuild.
It's been the plan from the beginning.
Right. It's just that Trump has been more overt in saying that. We've talked about how that's been a more covert operation for really for the last 2 years. But people didn't care and would want you to rather vote for the man that is complicit in that and silent about it than a man who is openly bragging about, oh no, we're going to do this. So, but Children Man rock. That's why I work with them. That's why, especially young kids. And shout out to Muhammad, even though he's on the spectrum, and I think this is just an example. Now, I don't know Muhammad, but it seems like he's more functionally capable, given what is read in the story, than others who may not be. But, even people who have special needs, I would argue are more capable of being human than most of us. Because I argue that they are more connected to the world than most of us are. They do not generally take the things that they see for granted, but they can also be the biggest faith givers if you give them the room to be. So, Muhammad proved that, and I know even in my teaching, there have been children who was sped in various levels have shown that to me too. So, so I think one, it's important, support special education, because this is the fear right now, especially with the Department of Ed, that a lot of these programs that help assist these populations in particular teachers will not be able to do their jobs to educate, and more importantly, like, help develop these children in a way that they can be someone like Muhammad. Because at the end of the day, like, they have to be engaged in this world too, and we need them to be engaged in a way that can be helpful. So it's great that Muhammad, even though he was young, he was able to impact the world in a small way, but in a major way, I would argue. But that's what we need. We need people to be engaged and be ready to show support and show love and to show that activism when needed. And this shows, even at 4 years old, that children, even with a disability, can do that. So I think that's the important message that stood out to me in both these stories, that young children are capable, literally, of changing the world.
Yeah.
And if we give them the space and the empowerment to do it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And bringing these kinds of stories, certainly why we're demonetized. So scan that QR code on your screen, go to ko-fi.com/Indie News Network, and support our channel if you'd like to see more of this type of content. But we get it, times are tough. You can help our channel by liking and subscribing. Same as everyone else asks you to do the same thing. Share the video. That would help immensely. Send this to your friends, your family. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. How heartbroken is that story to you? Because it was pretty bad for me. But anyway, thanks for watching.
Who are these people?
Care Bear, unfortunately, I have to do another shitty story from Gaza, and I do think this has got some data that is very important at the end, so it's not all just about tragedy. But we'll get into it. So this is from Rasha Abdul Jalal over at the EI, the Electronic Intifada, who writes, "Israel left a gift of death in my home." So people know what these kind of little things are, right? These little can openers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you've been in the poor and working class and or third world areas of our, this is what food comes in. Food comes in this. This is food. But after 15 months of displacement in the southern Gaza Strip, I thought I had lost the ability to be surprised, but I was wrong. I returned to Gaza City on the 6th of February following the ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel. Almost everything in my home was reduced to rubble, and the memories scattered among the rubble seemed to scream at me. I spotted a metal box with Hebrew writing on it and a key. I picked the box up, trying to determine if it was a can of tuna or beans. I thought the box had been placed in the rubble as if someone wanted me to find it. I felt a lump in my throat. Since when did a food box become so eye-catching? My mind didn't comprehend it at first, but something was strange. There was no clear expiration date or brand name. When I lifted the box off the ground, it felt lighter than I thought it should have. This prompted me to recall the text messages that international organizations constantly send to my mobile phone, warning people not to tamper with any suspicious object among the rubble of houses. At that moment, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I put the box down, then took a step back, then another. I immediately called the toll-free emergency number. I explained the situation to the person who answered, and I was told not to tamper with the box, to leave immediately, and then a mine-clearing team was on its way. It wasn't long before 2 men in uniform, but without any equipment in hand, arrived. They introduced themselves as bomb disposal experts with Gaza's Interior Ministry. They asked me to point out where I found the box. I did. The 2 men then proceeded cautiously, with one of them carefully picking up the box. He placed it inside an iron box in their vehicle. Next came the shock that made my legs wobbly. One of the men told me that the box was a trap, a bomb disguised as food. "This is a gift of death that the Israeli soldiers left for the children of Gaza," he said. At that moment, I thanked God that I had not taken my 5 children home. I had left them with their grandparents at my parents' house in the Al Nasser neighborhood, west of Gaza City. So, in that vein, I brought this. This came out recently, right? This is a 7-year-old, Ibrahim Abu Galeh, from the eastern neighborhood of Jenin, right? We're right in the area. So abused by the Israeli occupation forces who raided his grandmother's home at dawn, executing his grandmother in cold blood. In the end, they released him naked at the Al Jalima checkpoint north of Jenin. And I'll let him... They were freezing and cold. I'm 7 years old when the army came to us. I was at my grandfather's house. They came to us at 5:30 in the morning. They took us and made us get on the ground. All the farm was emptied. My grandmother stepped outside to check the call for prayer and they shot her. When they took me, they loaded me onto the Tiger and took me to Jalama. They brought foil sheets and covered us with them. After that, they started interrogating us. They put us in a big room for 1 hour and then took us to a smaller one. It was freezing. They were all sitting, smoking and eating, drinking as well. They hit me on the back and it left marks. It hurts a lot. After that, we left at 3:30 p.m. Whenever someone spoke, they hit him on the back with their boots. Whenever they spoke, they were struck. I fell asleep, but whenever he hit the door with his leg, I would wake up startled. So this is how they treat children there. Thoughts so far, Care Bear?
None.
Yeah.
I'm kind of numb. All of this.
I know, dude. The bomb disposal expert said demining crews had found dozens of mines that were intentionally placed and others that were unexploded ordnance due to a technical malfunction among the rubble of houses. It is believed that there are still hundreds and perhaps thousands of these unexploded ordnances that have not yet been discovered. Muhammad al-Qadi was killed on 7th of February in the explosion of a suspicious object left by the Israeli army in Rafah, Gaza's southernmost city, according to the Wafa news agency. In January, 10 people were injured, 4 critically as a result of an explosion in Al-Qarara, east of Khan Yunis, also in southern Gaza. UN data showed that more than 90 people have been killed or injured by unexploded ordnance since the Israeli attacks began in October 2023. It was reported on the 29th of January. The New York Times stated in December that the Israeli military fired nearly 30,000 munitions into Gaza in the war's first 7 weeks, more than in the next 8 months combined. Muhammad al-Haddad, 31, did not know what his home in the Shujaiya neighborhood of Gaza City would be like after 15 months of war and displacement, but he sensed it would not be the same as he left it. When al-Haddad arrived at his home on the 2nd of February, he contemplated how his house was now just a pile of rubble, but that it was something that could be salvaged. He found the remains of a closet, some wooden planks, and an overturned table. As he was trying to pull out what he could carry, his foot stepped on a wooden plank half buried in the rubble. A sudden explosion lifted his body in the air for a few seconds before he fell hard to the ground and lost consciousness. When he finally opened his eyes, the light was dim above him. He was lying in a bed, disoriented, not knowing where he was. He remembered trying to get up and his body not responding. He tried to move his right leg. It was not there.
Oh.
He was in Gaza City's Al-Ali Arab Hospital. For months, I have been dreaming of this moment to return to my home, even if nothing remains of it, but I never imagined that returning would lead to such a tragedy, al-Hadoud told the Electronic Intifada. Israel did not destroy our homes. It left us to die in the rubble. They don't even want us to mourn our homes in safety. He added, Al-Haddad is one of the untold number of Palestinian victims of Israel's mines and ordnance. We are dealing with a situation where most of the people in Gaza will either return to a badly damaged building that they cannot move into or just a pile of rubble. Asham Steiner, the UN Development Programs Director, told the German broadcaster Deutsche Welle in January, and the rubble still poses a danger. There are unexploded ordnance and landmines. It's a very toxic environment. Muhammad Maqdad, head of the bomb disposal department at the Gaza Interior Ministry, told the Electronic Intifada that the Israel army has dropped more than 85,000 tons of bombs on the Strip since the start of the war. I believe that the volume of unexploded ordnance weighs about 9,000 tons, he said, noting that his crews have found unexploded ordnance inside residential neighborhoods since the ceasefire. McDad explained that experts conduct an initial examination of the ordnance before disposing of it by separating the detonator from it or transporting it to designated sites according to its danger. McDad stressed the urgent need for specialized tools such as heavy lifting equipment and modern protective equipment to ensure the safe handling of these munitions. It could take 14 years to make Gaza safe from unexploded ordnance, the UN Nations Mine Action Service reported in April last year. So, and I'm betting that's been added to since. So,
Right.
Thoughts, Care Bear?
Well, I just think about the late and maybe great Princess Diana. This was her thing,
Yes.
like in terms of landmines,
Right.
for this reason. So it's funny that now, like over 30 years later, this isn't like this was her heart and soul, like from what I remember, like her talking about and trying to bring advocacy around and fell on deaf ears.
Yep.
That, but more intentionally in terms of killing children in the way that she advocated against. So
Yep.
it's disgusting. But as I said, it's just numb. All these Gaza stories that you bring, it's numbing.
Yeah.
Which I don't want to feel, but it's like week after week after week after week, we just get more of this and it doesn't get any better. So
Well, now it's beginning to happen in Syria too, right? And in my opinion, more so. Like it's much more personal over there. They don't have the kind of like, death from afar that Israel can surmount. So, but death still nonetheless. Yeah, I mean, that much explosives in an area. I mean. And they talked about it like it's unexploded ordnance. I think it's much more malicious than that. This has been set up purposefully, Like, they wouldn't make it look like food if it was just accidental ordnance that hasn't exploded, Like, this is active booby trapping and, in the civilian areas, which is probably a war crime and against Geneva codes, but what do I know? So I'm sure there's some rules on mines in there. But yeah, I mean, I definitely thought about Diana too. I also thought about the pedal mines used in Ukraine, which are a very similar problem, or were. But yeah, just heartbreaking stuff, honestly. But
yeah,
talking about these things are for sure why we're demonetized. So scan that QR code on your screen. Go to that URL, ko-fi.com/Indie News Network, or as always, links to donate are in the description below. We appreciate every monetary help we can get. But if you can't give that, like and subscribe, share this video, send it to your family members. This is the hard stuff everyone has to look at. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Otherwise, thanks for watching.
Who are these people?
I wanted to talk about just the siege warfare and starvation Israel has, been using on the Palestinians as weapons for a long time now, not just recently, but we'll get into a bit. So I brought a couple of articles from the Electronic Intifada, this time by Nada Hamdouna. on the 26th of March, in case people wanted to, know the dates and whatnot. But they write about cooking up steadfastness in Gaza. So they write, in Gaza, the struggle for food is more than about satiating hunger. It is a battle for human dignity. Israel has tightened its chokehold on Gaza crossings, preventing the entry of commercial goods and humanitarian aid. The renewed attacks, which have killed hundreds of people over the past week, signal a resumption of the war in which starvation was used as a deadly weapon. Not that the war ever really ended. The struggle to fill our bellies is one that families are still up against, with no reprieve during Ramadan, during which our fasts are traditionally broken by communal meals. So, this is Ramdi Abdul. Check the date on that. October 25th, 2023. Right? So, until now, Israel has bombed 10 bakeries in the Gaza Strip, and he lists all of them here. Right? And also continues, last night, the Israeli occupation planes bombed the only bakery in the Al-Maghasi area, which had been provided with flour hours earlier by UNRWA to supply tens of thousands of camp residents and those displaced there. The missiles completely destroyed the bakery and left a large hole in its place, in addition to demolishing a number of surrounding houses, killing 10 Palestinians and wounding others. And this is just in a long list of food-related bombings from Israel. They bombed supermarkets with people in them. They've, I think it was you who brought them using flour as just traps, just leaving aid out to, essentially like salt lick an area, for lack of better terms. So, I mean, just incredible war crimes all around. But, I brought these. This is from the late Hassam Shabbat. Not even a drop of water has entered the besieged North Gaza since October 1st. The Israeli government is systematically using starvation as a tool of war. They want to starve the remaining population that wasn't killed by their bombs. The entire Gaza Strip is facing horrific conditions due to cold weather and heavy rainfall. 2 million people are experiencing bombardment, starvation, and displacement as the Israeli government uses collective punishment as a tool against the entire population. And we covered, what was it, 2 weeks ago, the passing of journalists such as Hassam Shabbat. So please go check that out, just to remember them and honor them and do all that good stuff. But Vanessa Beeley, friend of the show, Israel is carrying out a policy of starvation and water deprivation in northern Gaza. According to Iyad al-Bassoum, a spokesperson for the Interior Ministry in Gaza, all bakeries in Gaza City and the northern towns are now officially out of service due to lack of fuel and flour. Again, this was November 7th, right? So we've had a long time since then of continued blockade, right? So this is the slow starvation of people, reminiscent of, famine, and, you can look back to Poland during the wars, all that stuff, where this exact kind of stuff was happening. So, not great. But to continue, finding new ways to prepare family dishes with extremely limited ingredients is one means by which people are resisting. They improvise on recipes by using canned instead of fresh meats or onion and garlic powder when the vegetables, basic ingredients in our cuisine, are nowhere to be found. With sugar expensive and scarce, people turn to honey or date molasses received by some families in aid packages to create dishes that satisfy their bodies and ease their psychological pain. And that's when Israel isn't killing the aid when it comes. So that's also a thing, if we remember correctly, with UNRWA. And what was the Jose Andres organization that was there? World Kitchen, something like that?
World Central Kitchen.
That's
World
it.
Central Kitchen.
So traditionally, staple food in our cuisine, fish, has been extremely difficult to obtain because of the siege on Gaza's coastal waters that is enforced by lethal fire by the Israeli Navy. My father, who knows that it is my favorite food, looks for fish in the market, but finds none. Food in Gaza is not merely sustenance. It is a symbol of steadfastness. The kitchen is not just a place for cooking. is an open arena to protest the harshness imposed by Israel's genocide and severe restrictions which remain ongoing. So, yeah, any thoughts so far, Care Bear?
I mean, I feel like you talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
You know, like...
Yeah. I think it's one of the things that, like... Right. Like, the entire time.
There's a genocide going on.
Yeah.
And... But the idea that people... Well, one, I think you can see at both ends that obviously food is survival right now, but still it's the idea of like trying to find pleasure in the food, which you should be doing anyway. It's funny, like I had a conversation with one of my families whose child, I think she desires him to eat like different food. So she wanted him to have the school lunch.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, school lunch, I would argue, is not the place, especially in this country, to try and expand your culinary palate, so to speak. So I told her, you know, but it's obvious, but due to different things, he doesn't find lunchtime enjoyable. It stresses him out. And what I said to her was, food should be a time of it's pleasure. It should be pleasurable. You know, like you should be able to sit and enjoy and eat. But it's the experience of being with people that you care about or getting to know. So it's not just the food, it's the company, it's it's so more encompassing than just ramming food in our bodies quickly. And I think here, because we're just such a fast culture in America in general, we don't necessarily take the time to appreciate that. But even in Gaza, even in the midst of war, that they're still looking for ways that they can appreciate, you know, food, not just in terms of survival, but thinking about their families and what they like to eat and trying to accommodate that as best they can or finding an alternative. So just to care, even in the midst of pain, do they take when they cook? I think is amazing, but I think we should be more mindful of that too in our culture, even though we may not be going through all of that.
For sure. I think that's why I brought this, and stories like this I brought before. I think it's like one of those things that Americans easily relate to, right? Like, you know, it kind of is a window into cultures you don't normally get. So, and it's also people are very aware of their own food situations, which, you know, I think it's an easy way to like bridge a gap there. So they mentioned fish and stuff. Keep in mind, this area is literally like beaches and on the coast. So historic fishing communities all over that. But again, the late Hassam Shabbat, who filmed a young boy sitting on a piece of wood who spent hours rowing in the sea trying to catch fish amid the starvation affecting northern Gaza. So here's just a bit of what that would look like. You know, imagine children that age here doing anything like that, you know, for food, not just for like enjoyment, you know, like this is because they're hungry. So, so this is what, you know, getting food looks like there. So, you know, and I mean, this is why this journalist is no longer with us, because he puts out stuff like this. So Israel couldn't have anyone actually humanizing these people. So, yeah, I mean, pretty despicable stuff to me. So, and I'm trying. Have you ever seen the Anthony Bourdains in Palestine when he was there? Mm-hmm. Those are important watches too. So I might go find that later for us. But he took a ton of. He took a ton of, not here. He took a ton of flack for that. So I figured I should mention it. And he felt like I just do what I always did. and humanize the people in the region. So, let them tell their own story. But speaking of people in the region, we're going to bring Eva Karine Bartlett on the lesser discussed Israeli starvation and death policies Palestinians in Gaza have been suggested to for 15 years before October 7th, which I know that's more important. So she put this up in July with none other than Eve Engler. So 2 Indie Media Award honorees. So
whereas I'm glad the Lancet put this out, I know they have to be neutral in their wording or whatever, but I disagree that these are indirect deaths. Okay, indirect in the sense they aren't bombs, but Israel has, for when did the siege on Gaza, when was that imposed? 2006, I think, or maybe 2005. I think 2006. So since then, you and I know very well, and probably our listeners too, that Israel has done everything in its possibility and its might to make life unlivable in Gaza and to put Palestinians on a starvation diet. You remember that back in 2008 or 10, they literally said that, and they cut the amount of food aid, UN and other food aid that was allowed into Gaza by a third or half. That Amira Haas, the excellent Israeli journalist that writes at Haaretz, wrote about that back then. So my point that I want to make with the Lancet, not to denigrate them, but just to emphasize indirect in the sense these aren't Israeli bombs or snipings, but direct in the sense this is calculated by Israel. They had the intention to starve and create the conditions of disease and all these other preventable deaths, and they've succeeded in doing so. The even perhaps lesser known to your average reader is the other policies of making it impossible for Palestinians to be food sufficient, self-sufficient, for example, farming or fishing, because the fishers are gunned down when they're a kilometer or two off the coast, whether they're on a hasaka, which is like whatever you call those paddle boards that you stand on, and they paddle out and they drop their nets and then pull the fish in later, or if they're actually in a fishing trawler, they're attacked by sniper fire, by shelling, by heavy-powered water cannon that's doused with a chemical that makes them smell like excrement if they're not, otherwise killed by shelling. They're abducted, their boats are stolen. All this stuff has taken away their sea source of food, and then the farmers undergo Israeli sniping on a daily basis just because they're on their land. And Israel says it's 300 meters on the Gaza side. It's all Palestine, but on the Gaza side between the fence and occupied Palestine. But in reality, in my experience, when I lived in Gaza and went with farmers, the Israeli army would fire 500, 600, 700, 800 meters from that fence. And it's a policy of targeted harassment to drive them off their land and to take away their food source, their agricultural basket. And then they also, of course, bulldoze the land, or if the Palestinian farmers manage to grow some crops, then they throw an incendiary device on the crops and burn them. So this kind of stuff has been going on since I was in Gaza, so 15 years plus. And they destroyed systematically the wells and cisterns, making it impossible to irrigate the land. So there's all these things that most people wouldn't know, which then sets up the base for all sorts of malnutrition, stunting in growth, anemia, all that stuff. The heavy dependence on UN food aid, which is really not very, it's pretty meager. It's not, it doesn't compare to the rich Palestinian diet that they previously had. And by rich, I don't mean luxurious. I mean the variety of foods they were able to grow, catch, or whatever, produce. Now all this diabetes, I'm not a doctor, but my understanding is a lot of it is due to these really drastically, before October 2023, these drastically limited diets that Palestinians exist on. And then the whole 95 or 97% undrinkable water situation, that's been going on since 2010.
97%.
I remember an article or a statement or something by the UN, I think it was 2012, where they said Gaza will be unlivable in 10 years. And at the time I wrote an article, or shortly after, saying it's already unlivable. So these are that's what I want to flesh out in my op-ed, because I think it's important people realize not only that, of course, as we always point out, this didn't start in October 2023, but also all these sadistic policies, the destruction of the power plant, not allowing them to rebuild a proper one. So the chronic electricity crisis affecting the hospitals, the chronic crisis of inadequate supplies of medicines, emergency medicines, inadequate hospital supplies and equipment, all that's been going on for very, very long, again, 15 plus years, 17 years, maybe. That's what I want to flesh out, because I really think people need to understand the indirect deaths are a direct policy from the Israelis top down.
Any questions? No.
Nope.
Shout out Eva Bartlett, friend of the show. Excellent work as always. When she was on, we talked about very similar things. Her times defending Palestinian farmers and the like. So, so that they could harvest and actually make food for themselves to eat. So she mentioned this about them calorie counting Gazans, right? So Seattle Times paper shows Israeli counted calories to limit food in Gaza during the blockade. Al Jazeera, Israel set calorie limit. Right, here's the New York Times saying Israel applied an average daily requirement of 2,279 calories per person. Collin, you've been calorie counting, That's what? Below average generally? 3 is the average, right? I do believe. 3,000. I mean, it's like adequate generally, but, depending.
For a man, sure.
Right.
For a man, I mean, it varies, but I would say on average about, I mean, it depends on the person. Yeah, around 2,000, basically 2,000 is what you would burn
calorie
off.
Deficit. Yeah, it's 2,500
but 2,000 calories on average is what you would just burn off by existing.
Yes.
So it's not like if you're just living, you will burn that off in a day.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're eating about that much a day, but then with the added stress that you're going through, you're at a constant
burning more
deficit.
Yeah.
More than probably necessary. So you're at a deficit due to the stress.
Plus, as we know, these calories are not good, balanced macroed calories, right, because they're not getting the fresh foods and vegetables that they were growing.
Right.
So
honestly, I think that might be a little generous.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I think that number is a little inflated.
For sure.
Because it's just kind of looking we're not that bad. But yeah, I would argue that is probably way less than
what they even said. Sure.
More likely, sure. But but again, 2,000 is about what you just burn off anyway. So the idea that you're eating that at minimum,
and that's for median metabolism too. So
right,
right. There's plenty of people who would burn way more, per day. So, but
right.
Again, the late Hassam Shabbat, the starvation scenes in northern Gaza are very clear nowadays. As you walk around, you see children and women walking with pots, standing in long lines, hoping to find a meal for the day. The men usually risk their lives going to the fields to find produce or vegetables. When the first wave of famine happened, hundreds of men were killed in the fields while trying to pick food for their families. This is yet another layer of genocide, starving a population to break their will, eventually forcing them to leave and be ethnically cleansed. The Israeli occupation forces know exactly what they are doing. So, one of the greatest challenges faced by Palestinians living in Gaza is exorbitant cost of basic items. Cooking oil has become a luxury good, with families sometimes going months without being able to purchase any. A liter can cost $30 or more, depending on the status of Gaza's crossings and the prices demanded by exploitative traders, forcing people to use it sparingly. So, guess what a 48 fluid ounces of oil here costs, Care Bear? $3.97.
Right.
So that's a little over a liter. 10 ounces over. So keep that in mind just to get some perspective. And if that's your oil, one of the most basic food, staples, you need it for everything, practically, that's ridiculous. So when Ramadan began earlier this month, which was soon followed by Israel's total closure of the crossings, the price of cooking oil spiked once again, and fresh foods such as chicken and meat became prohibitively expensive or unavailable once more. This phase of struggle has been the hardest, with shortages of essentials and prices still sky high, no reconstruction, and our only option to get anywhere is on foot. And now that Israel collapsed the January ceasefire, which didn't last for a full 2 months, there is little relief to be found in Gaza when there is little to be found of much of anything. With meat and chicken currently unavailable, families are resorting to some of the approximations of familiar dishes that have characterized our cuisine during the war. One of these dishes involves chicken or beef mortadella, a processed food product more readily available than fresh meat, to prepare alternative recipes mimicking roasted chicken. Known as fake chicken, the dish is prepared by slicing the mortadella into long, thin slices. The strips are seasoned with chicken or shawarma spice blends, salt and black pepper. After that, we coat it with breadcrumbs and deep fry it in oil. I mean, this is just bologna. That's Italian bologna. Yeah. So nothing like a, homogenized meat. So it's nice and emulsified, Collin, just the way nature intended. The technique is similar to how chicken breasts were commonly prepared before the war. With the mortadella, the result is a dish resembling crispy chicken fingers. So I'm sure that's delicious when not, made out of bologna, like breaded and fried. So anyway, people cook in clay ovens in a displacement camp in Khan Yunis on the 31st of December. This is in the rain. Outdoors on a homemade clay oven, right? So while you throw a Hot Pocket in the microwave, this is how people in Khan Yunis have to cook. The resilience of the Palestinian people is unbreakable. So this is what we've seen since the beginning of this conflict. And mainly the women, by the way. I know the men are also having to go in the fields and dodge bullets. But we've seen hospitals being used because they're the only way to cook food, right? We've seen bread being made in ORs, ridiculous. So I got this reply on a tweet. We ask you as free Americans who reject genocide in Gaza to intensify your activity now. 2 million people in Gaza are dying of hunger because of the siege imposed on them by Israeli army. The bakeries that were helping by providing loaves of bread have all closed because of the depletion of all food supplies. The weapon of starvation is more severe, which is literally war crimes, by the way. This is siege warfare. So bread, essential to every meal in our cuisine, disappeared from our plates at a certain point during the war. Early on, Israel bombed Gaza's bakeries and deprived them of electricity, fuel, and flour, a recipe for famine. During the period of no bread and no flour, families who were able to buy the scarce quantities of pasta available on the market, like mine in northern Gaza, would grind the pasta and use the resulting pasta flour to bake bread. So, under famine conditions, the quality of the light but chewy pasta bread loaves, which was neither bad nor good in flavor, was irrelevant, given the lack of alternatives to alleviate our hunger. When some of the bakeries reopened around this time last year, bread became available in Gaza once again. But the bakeries were unable to meet the high demand. Some people were even crushed to death after being trampled in a crowd waiting for bread. With some families are able to buy bread, others make bread at home using flour and yeast and bake the loaves in a clay oven amid the lack of gas and electricity. I would also suggest finding some yeast in the air, building a mother, little sourdough starter, if I were you, would be a smart move, and cherish it with everything. The firewood used to bake in clay ovens, like everything in Gaza, comes at a high price and therefore difficult to obtain. Some families pay a fee to use communal clay ovens to bake their bread. People are making do with whatever is available in the market. Rumania, a savory sauce in Gaza with a rich, tangy flavor, is traditionally made with fresh pomegranate. Because the fruit is difficult to obtain these days, some people have resorted to using jarred pomegranate sauce as a substitute. However, like many other food items, Jarred pomegranate sauce is expensive, with 4 ounces costing about $15. But one jar can last for multiple meals and allow us to mark a special occasion and maintain variety in dishes while so many foods remain unavailable. The shortage of meat and poultry in Gaza has led many families to seek alternatives to ensure diverse meals. Among those alternatives, bulgur is an ideal choice. We prepare the chicken by soaking the bulgur in water until it becomes soft. Then we grind it, add spices, and a little bit of breadcrumbs. After that, we mix everything together and shape it into long fingers. We then dip it in flour and water, followed by more breadcrumbs. Finally, we cook the fingers in a deep fryer, giving it the crunchy outer texture and soft inside that is remnant of fried chicken. So,
Vegan.
yes, bulgur wheat. I'm sure that's actually tasty because fried food, you can't go wrong,
Or
really.
I guess more closer to falafel in a way. I
Yes,
guess.
that's what I would think, right? And like, I'm surprised we're not hearing about that there frequently, you know? Because dried chickpeas, I guess they're also not being able to grow the chickpeas, probably.
Chickpeas.
You
Right.
know, so despite the
But
harsh
the-
reality, go ahead.
Yeah, the land's toxic, so
Yes.
that's really safe
Yeah.
to grow anything there.
Despite the harsh reality, people in Gaza insist that life must go on and that food must remain food regardless of the circumstances. So, yeah. So speaking of bread, right? You know, this is, I brought this because how many of your elected officials have talked about how terrible a thing bread lines are in any capacity, right? You know, just super McCarthyite smears of bread lines. But meanwhile, in reality, we're causing that in Gaza. So, this is by Danya Ahmoud Abu Satah, right? She writes, I wake up early and I put on my clothes quietly. It's after dawn and the sky is tinted a soft orange. The sun is not yet fully ablaze and there is a cool breeze. I wonder if it will stay that way, and I hope it will, because waiting in the bread lines for an hour with the sun overhead gives me a headache. I put on my shoes and I hear my mother telling me to hurry up, that we have a long line awaiting us. The walk to Doha Bakery in Khan Yunis takes about 10 minutes. Before the war, I would walk to university and sometimes near the sea, and I enjoyed these walks. But the walk to the bread line to join an immense crowd of people pleading for loaves of bread, that is not the same kind of walk. On the 2nd of March, prices skyrocketed in Gaza when Israel announced that it would close the crossings and stop the entry of all goods, including food, into Gaza. In the weeks that followed, many bakeries shuttered, hanging signs on their doors that read closed due to fuel shortage. The Doha Bakery, which is supported by the World Food Program, was one of the few that remained open. This means it's extra crowded and that we will wait for hours to get a single loaf of bread, which costs about $1. A worker came outside and pushed open the iron fence surrounding the bakery and announced, bread distribution will start at 11 a.m. It was around 10 a.m., still an hour to go. The bakery itself is a medium-sized building with a broken staircase leading to the entrance. Outside is a thumbing generator that keeps the place running. Inside are cracked machines. The building is full of bullet holes and the sun filters through them and the clouds of flour that surround the place. Children climbed onto the fence and peeked through the holes in the doors to watch the bakers prepare the bread. Time crawled slowly. Minutes felt like hours. The sun I had hoped to avoid had finally found us in line. I studied for an exam on my phone, but it was hard to concentrate with all the voices around me. In front of me was a woman in her 50s, with strands of white hair visible through her headscarf. Her hands had been blackened by fire smoke, likely from long hours spent cooking over a fire. She told me how her husband was martyred in December by an Israeli airstrike on Khan Yunis. He'd been sitting with his friends when the house they were in was targeted. They told me your husband was martyred, but I didn't believe them, she said, but then my heart felt it, so I went to Nasser Hospital to ask about him. She said she saw him in the morgue and couldn't stop screaming. She said she yelled at him, "Why did you leave me alone?" She told me the story 3 more times before she got tired of waiting in the bread line and left. Another woman was speaking to her mother. She said she was from Beit Hanun, near the boundary crossing there. They had been displaced from there to Khan Yunis, then to Rafah, and back. Now we're staying in an UNRWA school because our home was demolished. One of my daughters attends school, another fetches water, and the third tidies up the classroom where we are staying. Each day they switch roles, and I come to the bakery trying to adapt to this harsh life. It was now 11 a.m. Time for distribution to begin. A worker let the first 10 women and the first 10 men into the bakery. A commotion arose and voices emerged from the crowd. Can you give me bread? I need to leave to prepare food. I can't stand and wait any longer. I have a heart condition. I can't stand in line. I have a baby at home. I need to get back to him. More voices echoed the same desperate pleas, but the bakery won't fit more than 20 people inside. So the worker closed the gates again, and the waiting continued. After about 30 minutes, the same process repeats. Doors open. People plead for bread. Doors close. The bakery doesn't close until 10 minutes before the Maghrib prayer call, around 5:50 p.m. that day. Our term came at around 2:30 p.m. Remember, they were there an hour early. As I received the bread from the baker, I felt nothing. Just the exhaustion of the 6.5 hours we spent waiting. My mother remarked that we were among the lucky few, not only to have bread, but also have it in time to prepare food before iftar, the meal which we break our fast for Ramadan. We left the bakery and the crowds didn't seem to be shrinking. I thanked God that we no longer had to wait. That day was my younger brother's birthday. We planned to make him pizza. We gathered all the ingredients, took the pizzas to the communal clay oven nearby, which costs about $1 for a few minutes. This way of cooking is much more affordable because we don't have gas to power our stove. The price of a few gallons of gas is around $50. We then started lighting the fire to prepare some tea. As the Maghrib prayer was called, we had our meal, and then I went to my computer to complete an exam, the one I had tried to study for online. I took my cup of sage tea, walked to my handmade wooden desk, opened my laptop, and started the exam. It was quite easy. I finished it within half an hour and scored 29 out of 30. I had another cup of tea, went straight to bed, ready to do it all again the next day. Thoughts, Care Bear?
I mean, people will wait in line for Beyonce tickets.
Yeah. Not there.
But no.
Even if things were right, they wouldn't be doing that.
No, you're buying basic need, buying bread, like all day. Which honestly, kind of, not to say it's like this, but it kind of gives like what I experienced when I lived in Africa, like just with more in the sense of the technology that we kind of take for granted, that we're able to do things here so much more faster. It's not necessarily a guarantee over there. And even if you do have it, you know, you may not have the electricity to power it. So, because electricity, you know, in Africa can be pretty fickle. So, you know, so having to do a lot of things by hand, or things taking much longer to do, and depending on what it is, it can take all day. So it's slower, but so add that, but add to the desperation people have in light of getting these things. And it's not, again, these are basic needs. It's not like,
food, water, shelter.
Like when I lived in Uganda, like taking all day to make a pizza because there isn't a Pizza Hut or Domino's, and I'm in the bush, so I have to make that mess from scratch. You know,
that was for Dutchies, right? Where it's like a big insulated bag, right? So you use you heat the Dutchie as hot as possible, right, with your food in it, and then you put it in the bag, right, and it like slow cooks in the bag, so that you don't have to use a ton of fuel. And it's literally like a whole charity sending those to like places in Africa, so that we're not using, like, women have to go get firewood all the time to cook constantly, and that would mean less.
Right.
So, but anyway, similar things would be useful here, I imagine. So, yeah, I mean, definitely a bit rough, especially here in the States, you know, and as tariffs are coming up, food is going to get more expensive here too. But over there, I mean, it's just been, I don't know how any of them are able to like get anything close to a diet able to sustain themselves. So that's, I heard somewhere somebody was talking about that, you know, this will have ramifications for decades, you know, just in health there and overall in the region, not going to be good. So, but anyway, talking about these stories is unfortunately why we're demonetized on YouTube. So if you would like to help us monetarily, you can scan that QR code or go to ko-fi.com/Indie News Network. Link, as always, in the doobly-doo. But if you can't give, you know, you know what? Don't listen to just what signs have to tell you. Don't like, don't subscribe, don't share. All right? Don't let me tell you what to do either. Don't leave a comment. Jeez. Anyway, thanks for watching. Or not. No, dude, thanks for watching. We like it very much.
These people.
This cryptic title for a video, Cash Running Out, I thought was just, it embodies so much of our society these days, Care Bear. You know, everyone's running out of cash. Funny how that works. But specifically, this is in reference to cash disappearing in Gaza. And it's not just because it's being spent, right? Which it is. But we're going to get into it. This is Rolla Hamdouna from the Electronic Intifada, an Indie Media Award honoree. But they write, Mahamadi, 51, had worked hard for many years to save up money for her children's education. The mother of 4 sons, which God bless you on that one, aged between 12 and 19, combined a daytime job as an assistant at a medical analysis laboratory with private lessons to save up money for her children's education. She had prudently turned her savings into gold. She always dreamed her children would join the medical profession, but studying medicine is expensive, and gold seemed a sensible method for saving in the meantime. But in Gaza today, cash has all but disappeared. Aside from the brief ceasefire interlude that started in January and Israel ended on the 19th of March, when some cash aid was delivered by international organizations. No cash had entered Gaza for 15 months prior and none since. In the first 3 months alone after October, according to the World Bank, Israel destroyed or damaged 93% of all bank branches. With no banks and only the cash that was already there, so overused by now that it is starting to disintegrate, Palestinians in Gaza had to improvise. So, I did some digging, Care Bear, because once I heard the World Bank, I was like, wow, why would the World Bank be involved here? Right? Well, e-payments is a pathway to growth, empowering the West Bank and Gaza through digital inclusion. Fans of the show, fans of me and Indie show, we definitely side-eye the digital currencies, as you well know. CBDCs are not great. Please go read Whitney Webb and her work on the matter. But also, look, NPR, cash is disintegrating due to overuse in Gaza. New businesses are repairing it. Funny how NPR now covers it, seeing as how their boy is in office, right? All things considered, pun intended. But so this is the interview in NPR. So how do people get money? Producer Anna Baba stands outside a closed bank in Gaza. I can see that there are some people here. They came to the bank not looking for the ATM or the bank. They're looking for the brokers or the money mafia. The money mafia, brokers with their own cash reserves. One man outside the bank looking for a broker is Musab al-Shawaf. He says, we need to feed our children. The brokers are our last resort. Here's how it works. He transfers money from his bank account online to the broker's account, and the broker gives him cash, but takes a 30% cut. Sounds like YouTube, which we all don't like. Shawaf says the rate is very high. It's ruining me. Because of the cash crisis, Palestinian banks are offering e-wallets with digital currency. Digital transactions have eased some of the pressure while bartering has become common. People have been burning through what savings they may have had, including Maha, who parted with her gold in order to get much needed cash for survival. For every piece of gold I sold, I felt like I was selling a piece of my dreams and ambitions. Salaries, too, are impossible to convert to cash, and anyone still able to receive an income has had to pay forbidding commissions as traders, themselves desperate for cash, have lifted rates as high as 35%. The lack of cash affects everyone and every endeavor. Serene Abu al-Qas, 21, was married during the genocide, but not only did her husband-to-be have to pay dowry via bank transfer, when she went to stores to prepare for the wedding, she could not find anyone who accepted card payment. She could not afford or find any of the many things she had dreamt about for her wedding, and her joy, she said, was incomplete. Saif al-Din Aouda, head of policy at the Palestinian Monetary Authority, told the Gaza-based human rights groups Al-Minza that Israel had refused to transfer the Gaza allocation of clearance funds Israel collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority since the beginning of the aggression. Funny that. I like how that goes on behalf of the PA, by the way. Funny how that works. Israel has also banned the PMA, in effect the PA's central bank, from sending any cash to the Strip since October. The upshot is that those with savings in the bank cannot cash them, and it is both difficult and expensive to spend it. It's very difficult to pay electronically, Abu Saad, who used to work in the private sector, told Al-Minza. The war has left only market stalls where it is rare to find anyone willing to deal with electronic payment methods, especially with the power cuts. And as a result, Amal said, even though she has money in the bank, I am now unable to meet the most basic of our needs. And while some exchange shops are willing to accept electronic transfers for cash, commissions have grown prohibitive, charging as much as 35% or a potential $350 commission to cash out $1,000, and sometimes even more than that. With the tattered state of the cash available in Gaza, moreover, getting cash is no guarantee that the money can be used. Many traders will simply refuse to take old or damaged bills, and they can even refuse to take coinage, including 10 shekel coins. On one occasion in a market in Deir al-Balal, I heard one person trying to convince a trader who refused to accept a 10 shekel coin in exchange for goods. That coin was in perfect condition. Why are you refusing to take it? The response, the traders we buy from refuse to accept the coin. In another corner of the market, by a bakery, a woman presented a 100 shekel bill to a vendor who refused to accept it. In the end, the woman was forced to return the goods she had come for while asking out loud to no one in particular, should I throw it away? Of course, every crisis brings opportunity, and Palestinians in Gaza have become experts at survival by other means. Elsewhere in the crowded market, Muhammad al-Masri was busy repairing and restoring worn-out paper currency. Using simple equipment, some alcohol solution for cleaning, and a special adhesive, he carefully restores worn-out bills to make them fit for circulation again. I must often receive and repair the 20 shekel note because it has now replaced the 10 shekel coin that is no longer accepted by merchants, he told the Intifada. Ultimately, of course, is the ordinary person who suffers. Saeed Bassam, 27, used to work for a mobile phone company. He now uses his car as a taxi to try to secure some cash to buy milk and diapers for his baby daughter, Rose. Due to the rise in fuel prices, he does not make a profit. On the contrary, he told the EI, he is often losing money, but it is, he said, the only way he can secure cash. I lose less than I would paying commissions, he said. It also keeps me busy. The problem with high commissions isn't as acute as ever. During the ceasefire, rates decreased and traders started accepting bank transfers. Now, however, rates have risen back up and merchants are again refusing bank transfers. The practice of repairing worn-out currency has become more widespread. In every market, there is someone repairing currency notes. So I ended up feeling like this was a cautionary tale, right? You know, we've talked about Gaza as like a testing ground for just ways to combat, you know, the proletariat in any capacity at anywhere, right? You know, we've seen robot dogs and drone usage and facial recognition and so on and so forth. I think this is, if you looked at how commerce, especially when cash cannot be used effectively, and the digital stuff, especially when power is out and people don't have the means to accept it, like, it's definitely a cautionary tale towards those CBDCs to me. But what's your take?
Yes.
You got thoughts? Anything?
I mean, yeah, you basically said it. It just seems like, yeah, it's a training ground for potentially, well, I can't imagine that they will ever would implement something like that here, but they could.
I mean, they're already trying
Like,
to.
Right.
So,
but, you know, we've seen, as you said, we've seen they tested drone dogs. We're seeing them on the street.
yeah.
They test a lot of tech, especially as far as surveillance, that now they're being used. It's so funny, actually. You know, it's funny, like, even just thinking about this, like, because no, I think it was when I was coming back from Colombia a couple of weeks ago, like, just going through customs, like, all you have to do is just look at my eye. Like, that's how, and that honestly kind of freaked me out. It was like not even the passport anymore. It was just to verify my identity. They were just like, look into this camera. And basically was able to say who I am. So, like,
Right.
That's kind of scary to me in a way, that, like, you can pretty much get anything that you want, or at least, like, the potential is there for you, for people to get more than just like your name and birthday, you know, just with essentially almost anything related to your body. And, like, but this is the kind of technology that Israel is developing, you know, as surveillance to kind of monitor everybody. So it's, yeah, it's not surprising to me, but, you know, that the wedding part was just really sad. Like, she can even have her own,
Yeah.
you know, her the most joyful day at that era of her life, because no one was able to accept her debit card.
Right.
That's,
Well, and people talk about
to hear,
they've got loads of savings in the bank, but They can't use any. Like their money is just defunct.
Frozen.
So right. Yep. And we've seen that here. We've seen banking regulation, debanking, all that kind of stuff. You know, we've seen that with the truckers. We've seen that with lots of instances here, especially with like Stripe and PayPal and all that stuff. And it's just a mess that, like, you know, but, you know, I found it an interesting story, you know, and something to look into further and keep an eye on, especially if they're going to try to enact some digital currency there. So we'll see how that plans out, but yeah, talking about these things on YouTube is most likely why they've demonetized us. So you can scan that QR code and go to ko-fi.com/indie news network and give us a couple of dollary dues. We always appreciate the financial support. But if you can't do that, like and subscribe, share the video. You know, what do you think? Am I correct in my CBDC assumption on this? But otherwise, thanks for watching.
Who are these people?
I feel like I've had a theme the last couple of months, and the EI makes it easy for me to do. So, I've wanted to bring actual voices from what's happening in Gaza from the people that are there, and because I don't think that's done enough. So we're going to continue to do that this evening. So I don't even know the name of this voice. They asked to stay anonymous at the EI, but they wrote this on the 7th of May, so not too long ago. But they write, "The walls of a nylon tent are very thin. Our neighbors were just a meter away, though it felt like they were even closer. The tents were so tightly packed in the Yarmouk Stadium in Gaza City that I heard every sound as if there was no barrier at all. One evening, it would be a neighbor bathing. I could hear the buckets being filled, the water splashing, even the zippers being zipped. In the next moment, it was an argument or a conversation, most often about food. This is my share. Don't pretend you didn't take extra yesterday. Or, we waited in line for hours and now there's nothing left for my children. How is that fair?" People's lives were unfolding right beside me with only a thin piece of fabric between us, barely enough to divide space, let alone protect dignity. From tent to tent, our different noises blended into each other, but each sound was distinct, even silence. Just I could hear every detail of their lives, they could hear mine. Neighbors knew when my husband and I whispered to each other. When the baby woke up crying, they knew if we had managed to get food that day, or if we hadn't. Even outside the tent, my life was exposed in a way I'd never experienced before. With comments on my clothes or other matters, no emotion could be held in private. Our lives were open books, unwillingly read by everyone around us. Personal space no longer existed. My husband, 6-year-old daughter, infant son, and I lived in a tent at Yarmouk Stadium from July to December of 2024. Before the war, the stadium was the site of soccer games. Then, Israel used the stadium in late 2023 to detain, interrogate, and torture men. We set up our tent, a few plastic sheets and pieces of nylon stretched over wooden poles in the heat of summer 2024. The ground beneath was sand and dirt, which turned to mud when it rained. There was no insulation from the heat during the day or the cold at night. The plastic made it unbearably hot when the sun was out, and at night it offered no protection from the biting chill. We had no partitions inside, just a few thin mattresses laid directly on the ground, shared by the whole family. The flap we tried to close with a piece of cloth and rope served as the door to our tent. We had no bathroom, no running water, and no electricity. Only a single shared light bulb was outside the tent, powered by a generator that rarely had enough gasoline to work for long. In the tent, there was no such thing as me. It was a space for survival and nothing else. At night, my children would ask, why are people always yelling? How could I explain to them that real walls are not just made of bricks, they're made of privacy, of dignity. Breastfeeding my child at the time was a suffocating task, physically and psychologically. I had to cover myself entirely with whatever large swath of fabric I could find, even in the unbearable heat, just to provide some measure of privacy. I constantly feared being seen. I felt helpless, not being able to give my child the comfort he deserved. Before the war, I lived with my in-laws for 5 years. Though they were kind, it was a great relief when my husband and I moved into our home in Bet Lahia in northern Gaza in April. It was for me the embodiment of peace, a room with a door I could close when I wished, a kitchen to cook any meal I wanted, a space adorned according to my taste and preferences. In May 2024, we were forced to evacuate to a relative's house in the Al-Daraj neighborhood of Gaza City, where 15 of us were crammed into a room that would comfortably fit 4. And I doubt very comfortably at that. There, the psychological war began. I couldn't change my clothes without asking everyone to look away, as if my body were no longer my own. I couldn't cry when I needed to cry. There was simply no space for sadness. I would escape to the bathroom to sit in silence for a few minutes, but knocks on the door would come immediately. Hurry up, it's my turn. Even my silence had no place. I thought that overcrowded room was the worst it could get, but in July 2024 at around 4 a.m., that very house was shelled while we were inside. We rushed to the basement and stayed there until 7 a.m. When the situation calmed down slightly, we were able to leave. It was a terrifying night, and we left with nothing on our backs. We fled again, and this is when we moved to the tent at Yarmouk Stadium. One night, the suffocation inside the tent was unbearable. I needed a minute alone. I walked out into the dark, sat behind a piece of rubble, and cried. As I was on my way back to the tent, my neighbor asked gently, "Are you okay?" I heard you. We returned home in late January during the ceasefire. The walls of our home were falling down, the house had been burned, and the tiles were cracked. We tried to make it somewhat livable by covering the open area with plastic sheets. I was finally able to cook the meals my children had longed for during the war. Those dishes they once whispered about in the tent, and I would have to ask them to be quiet so others wouldn't hear the names of those dishes and feel their pain. But we did not stay long in the north. Israel began their attacks again. We are now in the Al-Nasser neighborhood of Gaza City, living with my husband's family. My husband, my 2 children, and I live in a storage area. No door, just a curtain at the entrance. Since the storage area itself is divided up into many areas, we use blankets as partitions. I think about our old home often, where I had a room and my children had rooms. Having a room might sound an ordinary privilege to most people, but this war has taught us the precious value of basic necessities. I have no strength left and no patience for the utter lack of privacy. I am just a woman who wants to close a door behind her and a space to be alone to cry in. I want to be me again. Thoughts, Care Bear? I mean, just sucks.
The idea though, and someone in the chat said it. I think it was let me see. I think it was Natalie. No, Jacqueline. Private space should also be a human right, along with food, healthcare, and housing. Like it is truly, like, I could say that for me because I live by myself. It's truly a privilege to be able to do that. But I think, in times when you're stressed and you need to step away, even not for a few moments, it's necessary. So the idea that you cannot do that but being constantly reminded of the pain, and like you're in a tent, so it's not like
Yeah.
you have a wall to at least kind of muffle the noise. You're hearing everything, so you're constantly bombarded with the noise, and probably depending if they're attached to screaming and the despair, like constantly. Like
Yeah.
I can imagine it will drive you nuts. So so mentally, I can't even think about what I would do mentally. Like, even during the pandemic, especially being isolated, even among ourselves, and I think for me, like, was extremely hard for me. Actually, I was sharing with a friend over the weekend, initially during the pandemic, because I don't mind being alone. Like, I'm an introvert. Like, I thought it was the best thing. And then a month or two into it, I realized, no, this is actually the worst thing for me, because I realized I'm more social than I believed myself to be.
Right.
So, but the fact that you are constantly bombarded with noise, even unintentional, and then like having to hear that constantly and not have any solace in that, I can imagine can be a mind trip.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Especially for the length that they've had to deal with it, So, but I mean, people who've lived amongst family members, even for, prolonged periods of time slightly, you could imagine how that goes down. Sometimes you just need breaks. So, but I just thought, we should continue to bring stories from the voices of those people. So, you'll be surprised at how many won't. But yeah, and doing that is most likely why we're demonetized. So you could scan that QR code on your screen, ko-fi.com/indie news network, into your URL bar, or, it's always in the description below if you want to give us a few dollary dues to keep us afloat. But we get it. Times are tough. You're probably one of the poors like ourselves. You could just do the algorithm stuff, like and subscribe, sharing the video, and, leaving a comment, letting us know what you think. Otherwise, thanks for watching.
Who are these people?
I brought this from the Electronic Intifada. This is from Yusuf Al-Nono, who writes how a new vocabulary is emerging in the genocide, right on the 1st of July. They write, I turned yellow last year in May. My whole body dripped with sweat, and I was more exhausted than I had ever been with any prior illness. I couldn't move my body while in bed, much less get out of bed. I thought it was the flu and that it would pass. I was confined to our house in Al Nasra neighborhood in western Gaza City. At the time, we had been among the first to return to the neighborhood, and the streets were empty. My phone was often dead due to lack of charge. Recharging a phone is an errand that requires leaving the house and going to a charging station, and even if I had enough battery, the internet was frequently cut. I was bored and escaped into various fantasies of the war ending and what college graduation would look like. Then, my condition worsened. My skin turned a more intense yellow. Even my eyeballs cast a bright yellow glow. This transformation felt surreal, and I couldn't accept that this was me. The doctor at Al Ahali Arab Hospital told me that I had jaundice, and the cure was to eat better foods, especially sweets. What a useless prescription in a famine when we can barely find food. When a bit of energy eventually returned to my body, I was able to get out of bed. I went outside for a walk on Al Nasir Street and was surprised by how much movement there was, with stalls selling different goods spread everywhere. How long had I been out of it? It seemed that many people had returned to the neighborhood. Yet all eyes were seemingly on me, gawking at my sickly condition. I was surprised that my appearance was attracting so many looks. Was it really that bad? I heard a voice calling at me, Mr. Lamona, you look Regan. I turned to him, laughed, and said, yes, that's me. I hadn't heard the word Regan before the start of this genocide, but it means something like jaundice in English. It is just one of many new words that are making their way into our vocabularies. Words that we must now use to match the many unbelievable situations we find ourselves in. We are living in a surreal reality with new Gazawi vocabulary to match. Who would have imagined that we would hear or even use such words every day? So I felt it was also timely when talking about, malnourishment diseases. That Sam Husseini brings up the 35 days of fasting that UN Secretary General won't meet with Gaza's hunger strikers. So did you know that this is happening outside the UN? That there are hunger strikers that are protesting?
No.
So while he was in New York City recently, I repeatedly questioned the UN Secretary General's spokesperson about Gaza and if he would meet with veterans and allies who were on a 35 of a 40-day fast in front of the UN. It ends Monday, as well as other issues. So here's Sam Husseini doing the damn thing. I'll let him speak on this, and I think the silence on the other side is pretty fucking damn loud.
Thank you. As I hope you're aware, a group of Veterans for Peace and Allies are fasting. They're holding a daily vigil in front of the U.S. mission to the UN just across the street from this headquarters here. They're consuming only 250 calories a day, what people in Gaza on average are getting. And they're just halfway through their 40-day fast. They're sacrificing all they can to make people see what's happening. Will the Secretary General meet with them?
The Secretary General, as you know, has been traveling. We'll have to see what his schedule is like when he's here, but I will also have some further announcements of travel to make from him in the coming days. But he's traveling this evening. We do expect him to be back in town tomorrow.
Thank you. People have criticized the Secretary General's office for not doing enough regarding Gaza. And in the course of this news conference, I don't believe you said the word condemn, even as you're talking about Gaza. When another reporter asked, put a threshold, and you said, we will not starve people. We will not hinder aid, even if it's a very limited amount. But of course, it's Israel that's starving people. But you're not condemning them.
We have made clear Israel's responsibilities, and we made clear that it is because of Israel's blocking of aid that we have not been able to feed people. Regarding the killings of civilians, we've repeatedly condemned this. If you see our briefings overall, I use the word condemn often enough that I worry that, in fact, it's probably being overused rather than underused. But the fact is, we do condemn all killings of civilians, and we, again, are critical of all measures that are placing people at risk, either of having to face tremendous risk to their lives to get aid, or to do without and risk starving.
There's a systematic pattern with regards to what Israel is doing. It is moving people to the south, offering them aid there, shooting them, with an eye towards apparently expulsion. You say, what are the alternatives to a two-state solution? The alternatives are obviously on the Israeli side. Excuse me. Expulsion of Palestinians, or a South Africa solution, where you just have one person, one vote, regardless of religion, and so on. So there are alternatives feasible, some horribly illegal, and some arguably utopian, but still there.
We've made clear our opposition to any forcible transfer of the population of Gaza, and we've also made clear our concerns about any system that would enshrine unequal or discriminatory practices. So there's no solution besides the two-state solution that would be able to guarantee the long-term rights of all the population. And that is the solution that we are pushing for, even at this difficult moment.
I don't believe the Secretary General has used the word genocide with respect to Israel. Is that accurate?
I think, again, for the people who are veterans here, we've taken this up many times, but the question of genocide is one to be determined by international courts. And so we will leave that determination to international judicial bodies to make. Rather than focusing on the words being used, what we're describing is what is happening. And what is happening is very clearly and unambiguously wrong. Denial of food to 2 million people is wrong.
The U.S. is apparently targeting those judicial bodies. Is the UN taking measures to, in practical, strong terms, protect them from malicious influence?
What I can tell you on that is that the Secretary General expresses serious concern about the designation of 4 judges of the International Criminal Court
This is the
to be
longest
sanctioned
I've heard
under
them let
the
Sam
executive
Husseini
order by the
speak.
United States. While the United
Yeah.
Nations and the International Criminal Court are separate institutions with separate and distinct mandates, the United Nations considers the ICC a key pillar
Normally
of
they would have
international
dragged him
criminal
out the
justice,
room by now.
and the Secretary General respects its work. And the Secretary General also emphasizes the importance of the basic principle of judicial independence. All right. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye, I gotta
Any
go.
update on the Secretary General meeting with the Veterans for Peace and their and other fasters outside the U.S. mission? One of them was just in
next
the
day-
emergency room.
I don't have any
So
update.
did you hear that? The next day, he said one of those veterans, so he comes back the next day, right? Remember, dude told him that homeboy would be back, right? So he's now saying that one of those fasters is in the hospital, right? We just covered a Palestinian woman getting jaundice from lack of calories, right? Among many, right? You know, they've talked about sugar hallucinations and, you know, the food is being drugged. We just covered how they're using that same aid distribution network to murder civilians. So
He just got back into town yesterday. I do believe that in the next couple of days we'll also announce some further travels. But while he's here, we'll see what can be done. But certainly, you're well aware of his own concerns about the situation in Gaza.
As you may be aware, I've raised this with Hawk, that there are fasters across the
The
street.
next day-
One of them is still in the hospital, a 74-year-old former U.S. Navy corpsman from Toledo.
74-year-old Navy corpsman from Toledo, Mike Ferner.
Mike Ferner remains hospitalized. He had a potassium crash. The rest of the fasters issued a statement. Hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza vainly try to survive on the same starvation diet, or even less than we are on, 250 calories per day. But they know that those people in Gaza, those Palestinians, have no choice. Quote, they can't recover in a modern hospital with teams of health professionals. Will the Secretary General meet with these people who are across the street in front of the U.S. mission?
The Secretary General's position on what is going on in Gaza right now has been very clear. I don't have an update to what Farhan told you yesterday in answer to that same question.
So, thoughts, Care Bear?
I mean, just the weaseling out of trying to justify their crimes and against people who actually try. And that will kind of lead into what we're going to share in our last segment regarding GJ Joe Nice. But
Yeah.
I think people are at a loss of what to do because obviously our government is not doing anything. So how else? I think now it's more or less taking things personally, and that's where we've come to, of how to acknowledge what's happening. And we saw that in the last segment with Bob Villain. You know, obviously they had a platform, you know, right there giving positions, but they essentially did that alone at the cost, you know, of their money and their money and possibly their career. Although I feel like right now they'll be, but I think that's kind of, it's not sad, but it kind of shows the lack of concern that the West has had in Gaza has forced people to kind of think like, you know, what else can I do? Like, I don't want to forget, but at a loss of what other. And we talked about that. I think you did a segment on this. I think maybe a week or two ago. You know, asking, or people asking Palestinians, what do you need? And it's valid because, like, you give them money, where are they going to get food? You try and get them supplies, it may not get there.
Right.
So it's like, what else can happen aside from our government stepping in to ensure that this assault stops? And that's not happening. So, yeah, I get it. We're kind of at that place right now of kind of doing this. I don't want to say in isolation, but at the same time, it's like kind of reflecting on the idea of like, I don't want to forget this, but also kind of as a reminder of, what Palestinians are going through right now in terms of not having enough food to eat
Right.
when they're supposed to, or the fact that that they were given, or probably still are given, like a 200-calorie allowance. That's like a couple of pieces of bread, folks. That's nothing.
Yeah.
So like, sharing in that despair with them, I think that's what people are coming to right now. So
Yeah.
and I think that even with the UN, that they're almost kind of dismissive
Right.
of it. It's sad, and
Well,
not the job that you're supposed to do. Like, it shouldn't have to come to people saying, we're fasting now, like, because you
Yeah.
haven't done shit to, or at least we haven't necessarily reported on the UN at all, but what have they done?
right. So here you go. Guess what that you want to see what that 74-year-old does when he gets out of the hospital?
Sure.
Here, United States, have some blood. You like shedding it all over the world so much? Here you go. How about some blood? A small amount of the blood money that corporations make taking us to war all the time. No more killing. Please, stop it.
So 74-year-old.
Yeah.
Um
He understood the assignment.
Sam Husseini, Mike Ferner of Veterans for Peace threw blood at the U.S. mission to the UN today. Here, United States, have some blood. He and 28 others were reportedly arrested today. He had been participated in hashtag Fast for Gaza. Most arrests took place at the Israeli mission to the UN, where a mass action was. Joe Metzler, co-founder of Service Members for Ceasefire, was among those arrested there. She has been doing Fast for Gaza outside the U.S. mission to the UN for the last 40 days. They limited themselves to 250 calories per day, considered medically to be a starvation diet, and the amount reported early this year as the average available to Palestinians in Gaza. Joy left the Air Force and became a conscientious objector, citing U.S. aggression in the Middle East and the continued ethnic cleansing in all of Palestine and the ongoing mass massacre of Palestinians in Gaza. So here is those people, right? These are the ones that have been arrested right there at Diplomat Chemists. So Sam Husseini said there was a die-in today at the Israeli mission to the UN. 28 people were arrested. So, at Alexa B. Wilkinson for the photos. One of the last times Husseini saw Mike, he was railing about fuckers killing fucking babies. Good on you, Mike. We're with you. Mike is a former Navy corpsman and an author of Inside the Red Zone, a veteran for peace reports from Iraq. Mike participated in the 40-day fast for Gaza until he had to be taken to the ER a few weeks ago. I reportedly asked the UN about the fasters and if UNSG Antonio Gutierrez would meet with him, but he never did. So, yeah. So Shilling and Farthing says 40-day long protest, and this is the first I'm hearing of it. But then why should I expect the complicit media to report it? Sam Husseini says subscribe to my writing to get that reporting. So back to this EI article about new words in Gaza. I felt it fit really well. But the journalist writes, Gaza was not a quiet place before the war, but people got used to the annoying sounds of al-Zanana, or drones. But I don't think we'll get used to the sky-splitting roar and high-pitched screeches of the fighter planes that fly overhead. In December 2024, my friend Mahmoud and I were chopping wood for a fire. I had not known Mahmoud for a long time. He was displaced from a nearby Al-Karama area. He was forced to stay at my aunt's house in our neighborhood because his house had been destroyed by an Israeli attack. After a short time, I got to know him a little better, and we became friends. Nearby, a group of children were playing as we chopped wood, and then we heard the abrupt and terrifying shrieking sound of the jet. We covered our heads and got low to the ground, anticipating a missile strike. The children were terrified and their bodies shook with fear. They also thought it was a missile coming for us and started screaming. I tried to calm the kids down. I told them it was not a missile, that it was an F-16 that had come very close to the ground in order to confuse people and spread fear. Mahmoud said to the children, "Don't be afraid, the plane shahatat." Before that day, I had only heard the word shahat in the context of a car screeching to a halt, like when a car travels at a high speed and suddenly slows down. The loud noise that follows, that is from shahat. Now I understand the word in a different way. Every time I hear the sound of a plane ripping across the sky, I say shahatat to calm myself. I will never forget the day, the 8th of March, that would be on my birthday of 2024, that I miraculously escaped death. This was a very hard time for us in Gaza. Famine was spreading and airdrops of aid were just beginning. I decided without my mother knowing to take a risk and go to the drop site. The drop location was near Al-Makusi Towers in Gaza City. It took me a half hour to reach the site, but for others, it likely took hours. I saw people gathering and joined them to wait for the drop. It was only a few minutes until we heard the loud roar of an approaching plane. It looked like a large passenger plane, and it was flying low. The scene was incredible. It was surreal to see this large plane flying so low. People started waving their hands so the pilot could see them and drop aid to us. I didn't realize what was happening as my eyes were on the plane, and I heard someone yell, "Janahat, Janahat." The word we use the verb jana to mean to lean, as in the Quranic surah, and if they incline, janahu, to peace, incline you as well to it, and trust in Allah. Surely He is all-hearing and all-knowing. The noun jana can also simply mean a wing, and the verb form can also mean to give wings to something. But at that moment, the verb did not mean an inclination towards peace. Jana was referring to the plane's tilting in the sky when it released the packages of aid. The plane rose at high speed and then dropped the packages with parachutes attached. But there was something wrong. Why was the aid package spinning at such a high speed? I saw that it did not have a parachute, or that the parachute had not opened, and then it would fall to the ground. I looked around and was shocked. Everyone had fled and was hiding to protect themselves. I didn't know where to go, and suddenly the first one fell with a huge crash that spread dust everywhere. While I was trying to avoid that package, the second one fell on a donkey, killing it. Its owner had been forced to leave it while he ran for his life. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. I was shocked by the sight of blood everywhere. I stepped forward to where the first box had dropped and pulled a box of dates from it. Then people started running towards the box quickly, hoping to get something. I went home in shock. But the word stayed stuck in my head. Janahat, Janahat. If I hear that word again, I will start running without thinking. Closing thoughts, Care Bear? But shout out to those veterans for peace out there protesting. Appreciate them. But yeah, it's why I like bringing these Intifada stories from the pens of Palestinians. Is pretty strong stuff. So appreciate the EI as well. But talking about those stories is certainly why we're demonetized. You can scan that QR code on your screen or go to code-v.com/Indie News Network. Links to donate are in the description below. And if you can't do that because you're one of the poors like ourselves, just like and subscribe, hit the share button, leave a comment, let us know how despicable you find this. But otherwise, thanks for watching.